Hi, everyone. Welcome to Critica NYC. Here we are again together. Thank you so much for taking your time to watch. And of course, I'm always very grateful for the Manhattan Neighborhood Network, El Barrio Firehouse, for supporting our show and the discussions that we've been having over the last several weeks. Today we have joining us Lucia Gomez. She is a very old, good friend of mine for a very long time. She is the political director for the New York City Central Labor Council. And I just want to say thank you for joining us today.
I'm excited. This has definitely come a long way since the first time we did this during.
Yes, it has. So today we were going to be discussing, what currently has been, what has been happening for a long time with Latinas in leadership, particularly Latinas that serve, whether it's in public office or as elected officials. Recently, we have seen 3 Latinas in particular being attacked, one who was a victim of a crime, and another who recently resigned about, what was it, last week? Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was doing her usual work in Congress, and on the steps of Congress, she was essentially insulted and verbally assaulted by a Republican colleague from Florida. Also, and she gave a really incredible response to that attack, and really a call to all of us in terms of how we treat each other in professional settings. And then fast forward on was very sad situation where Judge Esther Salas, a federal judge in New Jersey, was a victim of a crime where a white male attorney came to her home, shot her husband, killed her son. And many of the attacks that she was receiving, again, is because she is a woman and is a Latina woman. And then most recently, this week, we see the announcement of Dr. Osiris Barbeau, who has decided to resign as the commissioner of the Department of Health, given all of the very challenging situations that she was dealing with, not only just in helping to lead New York City through the pandemic, but even being able to work with her colleagues within the administration and within, other departments of New York City. So, I just wanted us to take a moment today to discuss what are these challenges that Latinas are facing when they take leadership. And, what is it that we could be doing as a community to help and have their back, right? Because at the end of the day, everyone is there to serve, everyone is there to do a job, everyone has come in prepared after years and years, right, of preparing themselves for these positions, going to school, going to medical school, going to law school, running a campaign, to be faced with these challenges. So I would like to open this up right now to Lucia. Lucia, if you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and then, I would love to hear your thoughts on what's been happening.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. I would say three big case studies I would say that we can entertain in this conversation. But before that, I guess, I don't know, I've known you for like 20 years, probably going to be 22 years since I, started on this path of kind of doing Latino civil rights work, Latino empowerment work, campaigns, civic engagement. And by campaigns, it could be issues, it could be something having to do with, Latinos' ability to elect candidates, or even just ability to get their voices heard, right? So, it's always been a fascination for me to be on the Latino front. I currently work on behalf of the labor movement, and still, even on behalf of the labor movement, making sure the Latino community still has the information at their fingertips. Spanish speaking members are able to understand the complexities of both moving within workplaces as well within their structures like the labor movement and their specific unions. So I'm always excited to have conversations about where Latinos are at this juncture, in our political development throughout the decades, right? I mean, and I've only been able to, see 2 decades of that kind of development, and it's been pretty intense, I would say. Since the boom, I still remember music of that moment when things started happening after 2000 census with Ricky Martin and Jennifer Lopez. Somehow they were like breaking points, these crossover type of discussions that we were having. Now everyone's so mainstream, and it's interesting. I can't see electeds being as mainstream, but we do see some good examples now with having someone like AOC. She doesn't just have one Latino name, she has to have like 2 Latino names, and it's pretty awesome. Yeah, like Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez, it's like funny. And yeah, we've had Latino representation in Congress across the country in different parts, not the same, not as many, let's say in the East Coast or New York. We've always, considered every time we went around redistricting, it was Nidia Velázquez, Jose Serrano, now we can add to that, Adriano Espaillat and Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez. But, there's so many complexities to the entire way in which public servants come to those roles, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not just jobs that they take on, right? Esther Salas could be some corporate attorney, right? It could be making bank in some other, maybe just as a private attorney, but she did choose the route of the judiciary and being a public servant. And to have her endure what she has as a result of being a woman and fighting, and at least at a minimum, being just, right? And hearing the kinds of things that she heard, in particular with that case and the cases of that one attorney who targeted her. I know one term that has come up in my life in the last couple of years has been this term feminazi. I had never heard of that term ever. I'm like, what do you mean a feminazi? And then this guy has used that term, to speak about what he fights against for men's rights. And I'm like, okay, this is a whole other level that I had not wanted to dive into. But yeah, I mean, I think we can talk about these different cases. I for the most part, am an observer of life, an observer of systems that are in place, and in particular, really critical of those that go into spaces to be public servants and take the public for granted. And so, these cases that you highlighted are examples of those types of cases. So happy to talk about it more.
Yeah, no, I think that, the first thing that we need to recognize is just to have these Latina women even just get to the positions that they got to is a huge challenge, right? There's a statistic out there that Latina judges are like 2% on the federal bench, and that's in the whole United States, and there's thousands of federal judges, right? So that basically means it's most probably like 5 or 10 Latina women that serve on the federal bench, right?
And then you can go further back, right? About how many Latinas are getting admitted to law school, and how many, and then go further back. How many Latinas, where are the numbers on Latinas within obtaining their bachelor's, right? These paths to being able to even get to where Esther Salas, Judge Salas is ridiculous. I mean, we have such gaps in so many places that to have someone like her be targeted. I mean, I was amazed at her strength coming out afterwards and saying what she needed to say.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that her coming out, and again, this is the same thing, right, with AOC, two very different situations, but the fact that these women, after having endured something, so horrific, from having your son killed to being called a bee, right, on the steps of Congress, to then have to come out and not only defend yourself, but also call on the community and on people, right, to take action around these things, that we cannot just sit idly by and let these behaviors go on, and that people need to be held accountable for what they do. The thing that I always find surprising for myself, right, is if, like, for example, if a Democrat had done what the Florida Republican congressional member had done, they would have been called to resign. They would have had to resign like the next day, you know? And what happens to this
Why?
guy?
But why,
Let's
right?
talk about why.
I mean, it's a little bit on the values set forth by the party and the contradictions that would mean if there's a value set, there's a presumption that someone who's a Democrat, again, an assumption too, right? Like that if you're a Democrat, you somehow understand that, women are equal partners, women are people, right? Like there should not dive into those I guess there's an assumption that the Republicans are just asses anyway, right? And that's just some shit they're gonna do. Oh, am I not supposed to curse? Okay, those are just some things that they're not supposed to do, and that they are gonna do. And so you just like, oh, he's such an idiot. Like people talk about Trump, oh, he's an idiot. Well, like that doesn't make it okay, right? There's no way that we can excuse this. And so I think AOC's response was right. I mean, and I think all of us, frontline women, right? Forget about frontline Latinas, but like women in general, like that's an attack on her, an attack on all of us, right? Mm-hmm. So how many times do we sit back and because it's not being done to us, we don't interfere, right? We don't say anything. No queremos problema. We don't want problems. And so we allow those kinds of things, those kinds of behavior, that kind of, right? Or chime in to attack another woman when we know we're already opening this up to like just the wrong people to go and attack, like, people, women for being women, and Latinas, with all the other issues that they attack us on.
Yeah.
So, I think both of them made really good arguments as to policy. At least I know Judge Salas, her appeal on the policy component of, not allowing judges' personal information to be available anywhere, right?
Yes.
That's extremely important. I'm curious as I run databases on, electoral power and voters, right? When we do campaigns, if you're a registered voter, you're going to be in my voter registration. So what happens to someone like a judge? Are they all exempt from those kinds of databases? How does that work, right? Where are the protections there? That's a very different kind of attack. But
I would also question the fact that the person that was targeting her had written extensively about her. Like he was very public about his attacks on her, and the fact that there wasn't something more proactive happening to protect her and her family in order for her to fulfill her job, right? And it was interesting because a fellow attorney said to me, well, judges, what they need to do is they just need to call their local precinct, and the local precinct is supposed to take care of it. And I kind of found for myself, well, that doesn't sound sufficient necessarily. I think if you're, a federal judge, you're being, targeted. Like I would think it would require a whole other level of even of a federal response and federal protection.
Well, and I think that something that, the general voter, right, the public doesn't also understand is that every single day that elected officials, even when you just run as a candidate, individuals like, Dr. Barbeau, the commissioner, and those roles, like you put yourself in a position of public scrutiny from the moment that you now enter this realm. And these are people vying for public servant roles when you run as an elected to best represent those communities. And, sometimes we don't respect that enough. Like, we make, a lot. Now, that doesn't mean you don't, judge people, right? Like on their policy positions. But sometimes we get really, there are really ruthless attacks against our candidates that have nothing to do with, their office that they're running for, or the values that they're going to employ in that place of office. Like sometimes the attacks and the one attack on AOC, and even the attack on Dr. Barbeau, when that happened with, from the NYPD, the leadership of that particular NYPD, was what they called her and how they spoke about her. There was no rebuke of that, and there were many women that I know, and some reached out to me about calling that out and being on that campaign. But honestly, like that's so to play that role, in terms of the commissioner and the mayor. Like I can't believe he even stayed after the mayor's inability to like rise to the occasion to defend the staff they bring on, right? And the value that you should have on this person who's like now being ultra criticized during a pandemic.
I mean, the same thing kind of happened to Gladys Carrion when she was the commissioner of the Administration for Children's Services. And to head up an agency like that, which is always under scrutiny. It's a very tough place to be in leadership, right? Because there's always, sadly, something happens to a child, right? And then who is going to be held accountable? And, here you have the Department of Health during a pandemic, which is super under scrutiny, that's receiving all of the pressures, right? All of the pressures of what's happening right now, because everyone wants to get back to work. Everyone wants to go back to school. Everyone wants certain things. And in my personal opinion, people don't really want to hear the truth of the matter of what the situation is from my perspective, right? And so, I feel like it's tough for a person like Dr. Barbeau to be able to hold on to her truths and the things that she knows to be true. She's the professional. She's the one who went to medical school and to become a doctor. She understands the whole operation that needs to happen for this. And it must be so difficult to then get the pushback politically when you kind of are really clear about, okay, this is what we know needs to happen to protect thousands of lives, right? And this kind of like juggle all of that.
I mean, think about this, right? There's a major difference in running for public office because, and being somewhat of a commissioner or a judge, right? Typically the vetting process for both of those roles. Well, let's start with one, the level of education needed, right? There's no minimum education requirement to run for public office. You have to be a registered voter and in some offices a certain age, right? But for the most part, we get people,
all walks of life.
All walks of life, exactly. Forget about, whatever educational levels. But for a judge, to get there, you needed your track record, your experience, you get scrutinized on, the cases that you took and the decisions you made and your writings and your life, right? Make sure there's no, additional backgrounds on those fronts. Unless you're something like the attorney, running for attorney general, we've seen how that can play out. There's a lot that doesn't go into, running for public office, right? And so you can have a lot of different people. But someone like Dr. Barbeau, where you weren't going to just find someone, it's not like the way Trump does appointments, at least thank God for that, right? Like you could just grab your best friend and just shove them in, I don't know, housing and urban development, and they're a doctor in medical field. In this case, this is a person with years and years of experience that they've put forward to ensure that the city of New York and its residents have the most trusted, I guess, figure. It's not just a figurehead, but can oversee the value and the work of a department and of an agency as important as the health department. And so I don't know, I question, like, who, first of all, half the time the appointments that are made of these extremely valuable individuals are made by people who aren't as educated and as valuable, in the term as we talk about education and experience. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of mistakes done by this administration. And losing Dr. Barbeau is just another nail in that coffin, in terms of where that legacy is going to go. And unfortunately, we see a lot of horrible mistakes, a lot of issues that have come about, and she chose to do this and take this path. Reality is, where's the support, from the community? Where's the outcry, right? Like, I don't know if we have that level of, I don't know, say respect or value for our public servants, the way we would have if, a superstar, got fired off the set for something or got called something by someone else, by a radio personality. Like, I don't think we have that same value set for folks like that. And that's kind of unfortunate, because folks are risking a lot and putting a lot of their personal lives on the line. We're talking about a history that person is now going to have forever, a track record, press articles, right? In the press, it just lingers forever.
I mean, I think for me, I take her resignation as a sign, right? And I see it as something that I need to pay attention to in terms of how I am going to move forward throughout at least the next month or two, especially when we're looking and talking about the reopening of the school. So like today, the Governor Cuomo announced that schools are to open, right? But I still, of course, worry about New York City. What is it going to mean, in terms of, like, if they find one person with the virus, 2 people, is the whole thing going to shut down? Some people are worried about that, we may see the worst, right, of a sort of situation of what happened like in Israel, where they opened up the schools and like 70% of the kids ended up with the virus, right? So, that's just kind of like, for me, like for myself, what I'm considering. I think that definitely we should be seeing more of an outcry from the community. I did see, for example, New York State Senator Gustavo Rivera did put out a statement on this, and wishing Dr. Barbeau good luck and supporting her in her decision. And, basically like sorry that she kind of had to go through this whole situation. Right. And I'm hoping that we get to see more of this, right? Because it would be very sad to start losing more and more leadership at this juncture. I think right now is a very critical time in New York City. Things have been going well, yes, but now that we're looking at the return back to school, it's even like more critical for us to be even more vigilant. But, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, we're kind of what the actual leadership gaps exist. Like, who are our Latino leaders in the state of New York, city of New York? Like, we have leadership in the elected office arena, right? But once again, they can come and go, right? They can choose to step down. and run for something else, or they can choose to step down, work in a different field and say, you know, I'm done with being in the public, you know, arena, and I'm gonna go in down another direction. Elected office is not the only where we need leadership and where we need public servants to kind of step up. But then situations like this happen where they're not provided the kind of support and they're not provided the kind of backup, not just support, but like, you know, respect that they should be provided by those that appoint them, right? And by those that, you know, are surrounding them in terms of staff and you know, the public and leaders in the nonprofit sector, right? In the business sector, in the private sector. You know, it's really hard to, you know, open a pipeline and ask for people to step up and want to become public servants, want to play enroll commissioners or board members, you know, or serve on commissions and in different work roles when, you know, stuff like this happens. And then, you know, it's just gonna, it sets us further back. I mean, we haven't had someone as strong and as, you know, fearless as Gladys Carrion in that role in a while, right? I mean, she served at the state level and then she came to the city. I mean, you know, we should have many more Latinos in leadership roles outside of elected office. I sometimes curious why everyone throws their hat in the ring to be scrutinized by, you know, 150,000 voters, but, you know, don't want to be scrutinized. You know, it's still public service, right? And they run to get, you know, to win. I guess there's a little feeling of that versus, you know, taking seriously their public role as a servant, in a commission capacity, in different, you know, board capacities and working within agencies and taking that kind of leadership. So, you know, what are some of the challenges within all of that? You know, I'm curious sometimes if it has to do with, go ahead, sorry.
You know, I had the opportunity many years ago to work in the mayor's office, in the Blasio's administration, in the appointments office, right? And like specifically, you know, I was to look at getting more Latinos and Latinas into government, right? Whether it was to be hired to lead an agency or to get them on boards, you know, and that process, right, it's very rigorous. You know, they want to look at a person that also has the experience. They want to look at a person that has particular connections, relationships that they build over the years. And then there's this other factor that people want to look at, which I always find interesting, and it's the thing called gravitas. And gravitas is something that basically means like, oh, do I like this person? Do I not like this person? Me cae bien, me cae mal. Here, Carmen is here. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Carmen.
Yes. And then Carmen hadn't made an appearance in a while. So here she is. And you know, she and basically like, you know, so what does gravitas mean? So there is, right, a lot to go through to get to that point, right? And there are some things that are forgivable. There are some things that are not forgivable and that will like take you out completely, you know, from being able to do that. I feel like when people go for elected office, people also feel a certain level of more of independence, right? That they'll be able to take decisions and say things that they may not necessarily get to do like in a quote unquote hired position, right, and working within the administration. But, you know, with all of that, you know, let's talk a little bit about the upcoming elections, right? We just got out of a bunch of elections in the state. We have some new powerful Latinas coming into the assembly, who won their primaries, right? We have Jessica Gonzalez Rojas, who both of us have also known for many, many, many years, from when we first started doing census in 2000 and redistricting back then. There's also another new person, Marcela Mitañez, I don't know if I said her name correctly, who also won her race. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you think, the landscape is going to look like in the Assembly and in the Senate for Latinos, because we have a lot of people who are leaving, who have resigned, who are no longer going to be in leadership. Some people who have decided to get out of politics and go into the private sector. And then we can talk a little bit more about what's going to happen, in the city with the mayoral and the city council races for 2021.
Yeah, I mean, I was Jessica Gonzalez, dear friend, right, for both you and I that have known her for years. She had an amazing win over a long-term incumbent. He was a union member as well, Den Decker, and I recall drawing those seats and seeing the data and saying, gosh, that's such a Latino seat, right? But because of voter density, the dynamics with the Latino electorate not being as strong in those areas, not just because their population was large, but eligible voters in that district were a lot lower than in other places, let's say like Washington Heights or another thresholds where you can have similar numbers. Jessica won, and that was decades in the making, right? And it kind of sets the tone of exactly where that district needed to be. But for, not to say that, your sitting incumbents are not doing a good job. I think the call for candidates going forward is that people don't just do their job. They stand out, they fight, they have voice, they are able to be a fresh face. I mean, elected office should not be a job where you walk in and stay there for rounds and rounds and rounds. And for those that have decided to, step away, Assemblyman Michael Crespo, also, stepped away as the leader of the Democratic Party in the Bronx, the chair, again, amazing, came, saw, did what he had to do, and then decided that's it, he was done. And, you also have to value that, because someone made a decision that it was time for them to move on. They came and they did their work on behalf of the people. And now, they moved on to a different road, which at the end of the day, especially within other leadership roles, we need Latinos in a lot of different places that are able to call the shots, that are able to make the hard decisions, that are able to move and essentially provide work and supervise our next group of leaders, through future pandemics and through future disasters. And then you have Marcela Mitaines, ¿verdad? Who won in Felix Ortiz's seat. And again, I say that in the most traditional way of saying it, Felix Ortiz's seat, because he's been occupied that seat for decades, as well. And so, someone came, they did the work on the ground to reach out to voters, and voters got them elected. That's the kind of like the most fascinating popularity contest you can imagine, is when you run for elected office. You're either going to get the votes or you're not, and they'll show on election day, right? So in those instances, we have 2 new Latinas in the Assembly. We did gain a couple of Latinas last year, 2 years ago in the Senate, right? And I think, we're still far from it in the city in terms of, having enough Latinas to represent these districts where voice, and a Latina can represent anybody. And that's the crazy part of all this, is that why does it, only have to be a Latina in a seat that's majority Latino? Latina can run anywhere, and can win pretty much anyone too. But the reality is that we do have those set, racially polarized voting realities where, a Latino will vote for a Latino candidate based on surname. I know I do it sometimes, I'll be honest. Like, if I don't know who the hell is running in that list of committee people, I'll go straight down and see who's the Latino name in my district. And I'm like, okay, and I don't, unless someone has spoken to me ahead of time and told me how, and I ask questions, there's certain positions that I don't think twice about it. Let's see what happens. Let's give them a chance.
Yeah, but I think in a place like New York City, it's a little harder because you always have multiple people with Latino surnames running. And that's where you definitely have to be a little bit more educated as to who is.
Yeah, well, but check this out. Now there's a new, there's a new person in town, and that's, RC, ranked choice voting. And so, it allows you to pick your top 5 candidates, in an area that's running. I've taken a look at the list of those candidates that are running. And, some of them, we don't even have 5 candidates. We only have like 3. And if you don't get over a certain threshold, then that's where the ranked choice voting choices kick in. If you're the clear candidate of choice of that electorate, then you win, and the other components of the ranked choice voting don't kick in. But let's be real. I mean, still running for office is also part of this like popularity contest, and how many people know you, and whether they know that name, and are they going to vote for someone they know or someone they don't know, right? El diablo, conocido que por conocer. So like, there's all these dynamics. The reality is that I think we're limited in a couple of ways when it comes to people running for office. The work-life balance, gets all messed up in public office, and in public service, essentially. There's a presumption that, you have to be the commissioner and only the commissioner. You don't have a life above, outside of that. You also may not, perhaps you have kids at home that you needed to, walk through that Zoom or that new Google Classrooms, but public running for public office is really taxing, on a person. You have, and I know that when we start analyzing it, does that person have what it takes to put in the work, male or female, right? But the reality is that it does take a toll on your work-life balance. And that's hard if you have, and you ran, Raquel, pregnant, right? Running for office, right? And I know that I dedicate a lot of time to my daughter, and I'm not willing to sacrifice that, like, ever. And the question is, why do you need to? Why should you have to?
So recently, the Broad Room and 21 for 21 had a conversation about the void of Latinos and Latinas in elected office and in public service. And, a lot of these issues came up within that conversation. But I also do find it interesting that there is this group of 21 for 21 that has been working towards increasing the number of women within the city council for these upcoming elections. So, I think it would be a good time for us to talk a little bit about what's going to happen in New York City for 2021. Right, over half of the city council is term limited, right? So I find all of this stuff interesting, that it's all happening right during this pandemic, and there's going to be a lot of big issues to deal with, from the city budget to whatever other big issues that happen with school, with healthcare, all of that. So we're going to have completely new leaders coming in to deal with all of this, right? And let's talk a little bit about Latinas who are going to be running, right? We have Diane Morales, who is an Afro-Latina. She was an executive director at Phipps Housing, has been doing a ton of work in the city for many years, and she has decided to run. And they're split for mayor, yes. And then there's a ton of folks running for this, right? We have 21 seats, and on average, you have anywhere from 7 to 8 people run per seat.
We have 51 seats, right? All 50, for me right now, all 51 seats are kind of
all up. Of them are up, all of them.
When they say up, people say, well, those that are not term limited are not required to, leave, but they are required to leave if they get voted out, right? So
yeah, you still have to run a primary.
That's right. So there are, but as of now, you still have a large, the first time we're going to have such a turnover of people based on the fact that they can no longer run, right? Because they're limited. And so we're going to have over 30 some odd, positions that are going to have brand new electeds. And, based on what I've seen already on the lists of people running, you do have, 21 and 21 has been doing their work, at trying to find, women candidates, encouraging, the running for that. I haven't quite seen the work of the broad room yet. But I do know that we have an interesting, cohort of women candidates, and the goal of trying to achieve 21 women to be elected, regardless of them being Latina. I know that we could, talk about the swapping, right? One Latina for another Latina, right? But that, that's not really what we mean. We want 21 as a total. And so, we do have Council Member Diaz, who has now chosen to resign at the end of his term in December 2021. That means that seat is now open, whereas in the original, point, we had someone like Amanda Farias, who was planning on challenging Ruben Diaz Sr. So now, there's a slightly clear path, or less, challenging path, but still challenging, because it's still, we still have ranked choice voting, which is new for those voters, and Amanda needs to make her case to the electorate. But she seems to be coming out strong in that regard. We are going to have, women still, a lot of women are running in that seat uptown in District 10. We have, Diana Ayala who's our sitting incumbent in District 8. And that was a fight, in 2017? Gosh, that was a long time ago. That was a fight, and, she came out strong and she won. And so, having her stay on is going to be interesting. I'm trying to think, where else we have Latinas running. I'm sure we're going to have, someone running in the city council seat, in Machaca city council seat, right? I don't have the list in front of me, but, I am looking forward to seeing what Latina candidates, step up and who's supporting them, because, sometimes, and I've had conversations with Diana, right, the mayoral candidate, and I think it's interesting, right? My first thing is, you're running in a citywide election. Do you have enough, people who know you citywide to be able to rise to that occasion? Well, so many things have changed, right, in the last couple of months, due to the pandemic, that whereas someone like Speaker Corey Johnson, the Speaker of the City Council, was seen as a strong possible candidate, is now potentially not running for mayor. And so you have, that field kind of got smaller, with Scott Stringer still running for mayor, Eric Adams running for mayor, but you had Ruben Diaz Jr., all men, right? Ruben Diaz Jr. drop out of that race. And so Diana seems to be, one of the only Latinas. The question I have is, and a lot of names are being floated around. Like, we have this one woman, Mia, being floated around as Maya Wiley, as a possible African-American candidate, but she's also not, really well known in terms of name recognition. And I find it always curious is that, why can't we also prop up? I mean, Diana Morales is a Latina candidate who's not well known either. My curiosity is always, there doesn't seem to be the same political will to find no-namer Latinas to run, like the same kind of backing, the same kind of support. But for a while, even after, AOC won, the bashing was going on for over a year because she threw down against the political establishment. I mean, I'm curious as to what's wrong with Latinas. Are we like way too in your face? Are we just too much?
I mean, that's a very good question, because I think that, when you are an insurgent candidate, when you are the person who just doesn't go along with the establishment, it's always going to be a challenge. It's always going to be an uphill battle, right? Because they see you as a threat. And, it's a terrible situation in politics, because it shouldn't be that way, right? And, like, let's take, for example, we talked a lot about AOC She was seen as this threat, right? Then everybody got scared that all these people were going to come out and run against them. And that has happened in certain districts, right? Where you have Jamal Bauman, who just won against Elliot Engel, but I also think that, yes, there is a time when things need to kind of, right, come to an end, right? And we have a whole new generation of people who want and are looking to do different things, right? Um, but I also think that, the establishment also needs to do a better job as to like bringing in this new blood, right? And I think that when you're looking at communities in particular that are underrepresented, and we want to bring in more people who are underrepresented and bring more diversity into these places, we need to kind of like, really open up that space to those people who don't necessarily go with what the establishment wants.
I'll be honest, Raquel, like I don't buy into these terms, right? Like this establishment term, like, you had, people running against quote unquote establishment candidates. What does that even mean? Is it because, whoever's the chair of the Democratic Party sees that person as viable, somehow that person's seal of approval, because they're in the official party ranks, is somehow the establishment, right? And as a result,
but look, Lucia, let's be honest. There is a certain, level of privilege that you get when you are with the establishment, because when you get the chair of the county, then that means most probably you're going to get the endorsements from the different unions or different people in the corporate sector who like already align with that person and trust that person's judgment, trust what they're going to do, and will go behind that person, right? And I will give the prime example. Like, for example, when I ran for the New York City Council, I was not an establishment person, right? I'm clearly not that person. And Richie Torres was endorsed by the council member for whom he was working for, and literally he had the ability to raise over $60,000 in one night, where it took me months to raise the good money I raised for my race. So, right,
but then this is the problem with the loose definitions of establishment. Like a lot people in the establishment would never have called Richie an establishment candidate, because you know how to align yourself with individuals of experience and respect in a neighborhood. Does that make you an establishment, or does that make you really smart, right? Like, why would you align yourself with a group of people that are hated in a neighborhood and then expect to be the top vote getter? But you align yourself with individuals who have a track record and have respect and have the viability to provide, someone, and we're using a bad example, I think, in terms of Richie, because Richie was not, and is still not considered like an establishment candidate, even though there's a lot of pro and opposition towards Richie for a lot of issue oriented reasons versus, whether or not the Bronx establishment could claim that Richie was their candidate. Doubt that, right? And that has been like said over and over again. Someone like Gustavo, Senator Rivera, who ran, against a lot of different people. They didn't want him, anyone to run against Espada. They allowed Espada to stay in that role. Can't see Gustavo being establishment, right? So anyway, I want to kind of like, there's a lot of anti-establishment that's being discussed in a lot of different ways. And it recently reminds me of an article around why is it that unions, a lot of the candidates that unions endorsed did not win. And we had a lot of people that were, running opposition to the establishment candidates, right? The more name recognition individuals. And the reality is that if what this is showing is that our electorate is making a decision without these validators, like, the chair of the parties or, validators like other sitting electeds. And on the contrary, they're seeing that as a turn off. We need to think about that. You know, we need to really think about what that means, and what does that mean for Latinas that have been busting their asses for years now, trying to gain traction with, you know, quote unquote, the powers that be, or through, you know, viable roles as district leaders, you know, as committee people, as heads of nonprofits. But because they've aligned themselves with establishment individuals, because of council funding, because of, you know, the fact that these people had respect in the neighborhood and they needed to be able to put forward, like if you were an executive director at a nonprofit, you know what I mean? And you had certain funding sources, like, why is that a bad thing? You know, I think it might hurt us more than.
I think just going back to the issue of what if it's smart. I don't know if it's an issue of smart. It's an issue of being strategic, right? And so I think there are some people, right, who come into politics and they come in like with very clear, you know, they want to work on this particular set of policies, or they have a very particular way of looking at politics, right? For example, AOC, you know, who aligns herself as a democratic socialist, right? And she has a very particular vision of politics, right? She has her own political philosophy on how politics should operate, right? And so people will then make decisions based on their philosophy as to how they see themselves as a candidate and as an elected, you know? So depending on, you know, where you fall, like you said earlier, the issue of values, right? What are your values? What's your philosophy? You know, who do you align yourself with in a community, you know, is, you know, telling, right? What things will you negotiate on? What things are non-negotiables? Like these are all like the different factors I think that, you know, goes into the decisions, right, around whether one runs and then who's supporting that person.
I just think what the majority of people don't see is the wheeling and dealing that happens, and the sit downs and the conversations that happen before you start running, right? And a lot of I mean, look, I give value to, you know, everyone who busts their butts and beats a candidate regardless of having an endorsement or not, you know, that you gotta, you know, hands down, that's very good, especially in a district that hasn't had engagement. The reality is that a little bit of engagement goes a long way at engaging a base and engaging a base for you. That's the power of how to vote. You only have a certain number of voters and you have to get the majority and then you win. So pull out your majority. This is not rocket science. This is pure math. But the reality is that a lot of these quote unquote anti-establishment candidates work their butts off to try to get establishment support. And when they don't get it, right, because they know it's much easier to work down that path, then all of a sudden they're anti-establishment candidates. Like, you know, I have to stop and think about that. You want union endorsements, you're striving to get union endorsements, but you somehow want to say you're like, you know, anti-establishment. And I'm thinking, well, unions, I don't know, I guess they're establishment. I can't say that they're establishment.
Some unions are, some unions aren't.
I mean, but the reality is that they fight for workers. If the workers work for the establishment, they fight for the workplace, right? And for the workers in that there. So it's really fascinating because I think there's too many assumptions made. At the end of the day, every institution, every infrastructure has a goal, a mission. Accomplish that right, and no one's going to disrespect you. It's when you go above and beyond to not be about that goal or about that mission, that's when the fall of those structures and the fall of those different operations, you know, exists. I cannot tell you right now in Manhattan, in the Bronx, in Queens, in Brooklyn, in Staten Island, that there is, the way I believe I learned in the early 2000s, the same kind of establishment parties, Democratic parties, because that's at the end of the day, in New York City in particular, you run primaries like you were running in general elections. Once you win that, you're done. You know, I would say a lot of these candidates, they're not choosing to run in the general election on their party lines and their principles against a Democratic primary candidate. They're running to be the primary candidate. And that primary and that Democratic Party has a structure. And somehow you're gonna work through those structures, or you're gonna attempt to change those structures. So like for me, there's a kind of a lot of contradictions happening when we choose to call someone the establishment, candidate, or choose to call someone the non-establishment, this is, the insurgent. I'm like, insurgent what? There was a crap load of insurgent candidates in 2018 who had worked in city government, worked in state government, worked for different party bosses. You just choose who your boss is gonna be. And you think, running this on my own, okay. But you also know that there is a support mechanism. Dr. Bourbeau learned that, right? The support backing, who appoints you is different from, your voters and your electorate. But if you're standing alone, you will be alone. Like through a lot of people ask for spokespeople, and they want to know that you got their back and that you can fight with them. And you need people, and you need teams, and and our government is not run by solo politics. You don't, one vote wins your bill. So yeah, we can throw that around, but I don't know how that helps in the long term, the voters or anybody else.
Well, Lucia, this has been so exciting. We can most probably go on for a whole other hour about all of this, because I don't even think we got to touch on like all the things we really want to talk about. But I want to thank you again for your time here. Let's just put in a little plug on the 2020 census, making sure that everybody gets counted, right? And there's information behind Lucia if you'd like more information on that, and make sure you get counted. Again, thank you, Lucia, for joining us today. This was very good, very informative. I hope that a lot of people, especially people who are looking to run for political office, watch this, learn a little bit, right, about, and think about what things you want to incorporate into your own campaign.
And I would recommend that they reach out to you, right, Raquel? They either reach out to you, or they can reach out directly to me. I would love to know that you're running. I would love to, we both started, there's a reason why we started Latina PAC, Political Action Committee 2 decades ago.
For a whole other day. But we have 2 minutes left. And all of our contact information will be up in the credits. You can find our information on the Facebook Live. You can contact me on my Instagram, critica.nyc. Thank you again. Thank you, Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I want to thank our executive producer, Zenaida Mendez, our studio manager, Freddie Pinto, for all of their work they do to put this together. And until next time, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Raquel.